Thanks, Chen. Thanks, Lord Mayor, for that great introduction. My name's Colin Kinner. I'm involved in a number of aspects of the Brisbane startup scene, and I'm very pleased to have been very directly involved in the program of activities through Brisbane Marketing that is now part of the digital strategy that you just heard about. Specifically, we have a program of activities to boost the local startup ecosystem, and one of those that very directly touches all of you today is sponsorship of this event. So we're very pleased to be the gold sponsor of this event. We're also launching today the Visiting Entrepreneurs program, of which Tyler is the first cab off the rank. So this is a program intended to bring experienced entrepreneurs and advisors to Brisbane to share their experience in parts of the world where startup ecosystems are flourishing. So I'll let Tyler introduce himself. Also, just like before we do that, to acknowledge the financial support of the Queensland Government in bringing Tyler out for a series of events this week through Decidia, Department of Science, Information Technology, Innovation and the Arts. So thanks for that support, and Tyler, if you'd like to join us. While you're coming up, while you're here, we will have some questions at the end, and we're also on a Google Hangout, so there'll be a number of people in other parts of the state joining that Google Hangout, and if we have time, we're going to take some questions via Twitter.
Great. So it's a real pleasure to be here. We just came from an awesome breakfast, which I have to say, as I mentioned, that breakfast was really inspiring. It was far surpassed anything that we had ever had in Los Angeles, or have had in Stockholm, or that I've been on par with things that I've seen in London, actually. UK Trade and Investment is incredible at what they're doing here, and it seems like you guys are on a similar trajectory. The story with me started in Los Angeles, and how Los Angeles, our path to becoming a kind of our own tech community grew out of the fact that we grew very tired of seeing our friends go to Silicon Valley when they were getting funded for their companies. Silicon Valley at the time, and in 2007, 2008, was still demanding that if you're going to take our money, you have to relocate up here. And I was part of one of the first companies that bucked that trend and said, no, we're going to stay in Los Angeles, but thank you for the money. And it was a bold maneuver at the time, but they let us do it. And the friends of ours that were leaving, those of us who decided we were going to stay, got together and rallied around and said, how do we stop our friends from leaving? And, you know, many years, we got together and kind of strategized. Some of us got together regularly in meetings. And I think some of those other people who I'm alluding to will actually may come over here, hopefully, and tell their version of the story. But what happened, you know, 3-4 years later is we really surpassed our own ambitions, because our ambition was to stop our friends from leaving. And in reality, what happened was mission accomplished. People no longer leave Los Angeles, or very rarely. And lately, we've seen some of the best investors in Silicon Valley. 2 of the top 5 investors in all of Silicon Valley have relocated to Los Angeles. This far surpassed our initial goal, right? But that's what happens when you really get together and provide a really awesome place for innovation and for startups to participate. And one of the things we did, looking back, London came to town and said, you know, what are you guys doing so well here? Why things are really happening here? What's going on? And at that dinner where I was asked, you know, what were you doing, I had to think of what are we doing that's working so well? And one of the things that we did that really worked really well, and LA did this really well, and I would encourage the habit to start here today and now, and we did it last night. I would suggest we do it again right now, which is every event that we went to. How much did it cost to come to this event, by the way? This? So there's actually an additional small cost that you weren't aware of. It wasn't printed on the website, but the other cost to attend is you have to take a photo at this event and put it on your Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Foursquare or Check-in or whatever you do with the appropriate hashtags for this, which Digital BNE and Tech Techconnect 2012 and any event that you go to, or if you host a tech event, I would highly encourage you to remind everyone to get into this habit of when they arrive, check in that you're there. And I see the cameras up right now, and if you want to include me in your tweet, my Twitter handle is Steep Decline. Feel free to tag me in as well. But that was the beginning. And we started doing that, and it really grew and especially because I've noticed events here. You have quite a few tech events going on here that people are not quite aware of. You would be surprised how quick the global consciousness will rise when everyone makes it a habit. And I think we've got about 30 tweets happening as I speak. Hopefully we can get all 100 of you. Like, let's do this. Every event that you go to, it takes you, 1 minute per event. If everyone who's in the community does this, this is perhaps collectively the most important thing everyone could do sitting here right now. So it's, again, if you're going to tech events or you're hosting the tech event, I would highly encourage you to do what I'm asking the audience to do right now. You would be amazed how quickly you'll see the benefits of doing it. But that's one of multiple ingredients in this recipe of how to grow this community and bring awareness to this community. So, gosh, I mean, I could take this conversation in one of about 40 different directions. But getting back to the breakfast that we were at, incredibly inspired by what I've seen thus far. And I really was here yesterday for the first time, where I went to River City Labs, and very impressed by what was going on there. We had a pitch event there where they're getting prepared to, some of them are going to Silicon Valley, then went over to iLab, again, very impressed there, and more people going everywhere. And this, by the way, as somebody who went through Los Angeles, we had this amazing moment at around 2000, the end of 2008, early 2009, where there was this inflection point, where there was no turning back, and it was obvious that this is going to happen. It occurred to me last night at the library event at the Edge, when I asked the audience who, is there an iPhone developer group? And we said, yeah, we have an iPhone developer group. Is there an Android developer group? Oh, yeah, we just started one, in fact. Where are you doing it at? Oh, we're doing it at this cafe. And is there a Ruby developer group? And the guys from the Ruby developer group, yeah, we're doing a Ruby developer group. Is anyone here in the audience part of organizing a startup event of some kind? Wow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. This is amazing. This is, raise your hands again, because the guys in the front row wanted to see the hands over it. This is, I mentioned, thank you, by the way. I mentioned this at breakfast, that last night it occurred to me, and I got a big smile on my face as I was walking around my hotel last night after the library event. It is obvious to me the infection has happened here. The turning point, there's now organically, it will happen here. And this is awesome. And so I look back and I think of Los Angeles at that inflection moment, and it's exactly this right here. And I remember the first events that we had in LA that were almost identical to this. You're 2 years from now, even a year from now, you will likely look back at now with a lot of surprise as to how much progress will be made in the next 12 months. If the right recipe is sort of followed, basically. But there's no reason it won't. But like I said, it'll happen organically. The government that you have here is, like Sweden, very accommodating to helping in any way that they can, which is awesome. We don't have that luxury in the US. But I would also caution with that, don't rely on the government to give you the okay or the green light to do anything. That's one of the benefits we have in the U.S. is we're not reliant on the government in any way. And use them as a resource, but not as a dependency of any kind. Don't wait for permission to do anything, and certainly get inspired by the stories and the resources that are out there. Brad Feld, who is really the sort of chief of the Boulder tech community, has published an amazing book recently about growing startup communities that I encourage everybody to get a hand on. You can download the digital version, of course. But it's the writing's on the wall. I think Brisbane is, the only question now is, can you surpass Sydney? Is that possible? I don't know that their governance is as committed to the pursuit. So it is possible, by the way, because what'll end up happening is when the investors start showing up in Australia, which this is, you know, in the next, by the time the Big 20 event happens in next November, when investors start showing up to Australia, it's, in their mind, it's not that big of a difference between Sydney, Melbourne, you know, Brisbane. They don't necessarily know where it's all happening, and there's a really good chance that, you know, a year from now, there might be it'll be part of the, they have to come here. You know, that's sort of the, I think that's, there is a chance that if a real cluster starts happening here geographically, that they'll come here. Because one of the things that's really interesting with startup community folks is what I call the Apple Store effect, which is people of startup communities in LA. And when you come to LA, does anyone here, I'm curious, raise your hand if you know where the startup community is in LA. If you arrived at LAX, you have a sense of where you would go, right? Okay, thanks. It is somewhat important, and we hope to get the word out. You know, most everything that happens is in Santa Monica, and in London, it's in near Old Street Station in Shoreditch, which, by the way, they have their big annual event called Digital Shoreditch coming up next month. So maybe some of the folks here want to go to that. And I would encourage the community here collectively to keep in their consciousness the idea of working together in even a geographic sense. Because one of the things I've noticed while I've been here, which is, again, very brief amount of time, is that things are a little bit, there isn't quite yet the geographic center to things like there is in Silicon Valley, or both in San Francisco and in the Valley. In San Francisco, it's all in the SoMa area, and in Silicon Valley, it's at University Avenue in Palo Alto. And the more that people work together to keep their events kind of in one area, sort of the better, that more serendipitous type things start happening. So I'd be very encouraging of that. I'm really in sort of Q&A mode in my mind. But should I go back into the kind of story of Los Angeles, or? Yeah, I think questions might lead. I tend to ramble on questions, so each question can lead into 10 minutes, 20 minutes. Yes, Santa Monica, the community is basically all within bicycle distance, which is a strange metaphor to use for Los Angeles because nobody rides bicycles. But in San Francisco is not that large. If you've ever been there. Yet within San Francisco, all of the startups are all within walking distance for the most part. And they tend to gravitate around Twitter's office. Twitter kind of established the ground zero that everyone went around. And in Palo Alto, they're all on University Avenue, which is where all of the venture capitalists get their office here, where all the restaurants were and everything. So it remains to be seen how things develop here. I caution this because I come from Stockholm now, where this is a real predicament for Stockholm. It's really spread out, and it's really hard to even begin to establish where we should even focus everybody. Here, I feel like the cement is wet enough where it still could be pushed into a corner. So I would hope people work together with their event planning and things like that. Yeah. I feel like it really is. I feel like, and I'm speaking from the perspective of Stockholm, I feel like Stockholm is really suffering from being so spread out that there is no center at all to any of it. And the places that have centers really benefit from this. And there was, in fact, a Harvard study around this, around the cluster effect. In fact, Santiago, Chile has a lot of negatives, but one of the things that they really have going for them is all 350 startups are, in their case, literally under one roof. And that gets back to that Apple Store metaphor or phenomena where startup community folks, or Apple geeks, when you're in Paris or somewhere and there's an Apple Store and you're looking at the Opera and you know there's the Apple Store, 100, 200 meters away. You know everything that's in that Apple Store, right? You don't need to buy anything that's in that Apple Store, and you know everything in the inventory of that store. There's nothing new has been released. You've seen everything, yet you will still go to the Apple Store because you want to see it and be there, right? The same thing happens, and there's a lot of smirks in the audience because I think the Apple geeks know what I'm talking about. Startup geeks are the same way. Like when you're in another town and you know there's startup activity in that town and it's a tech hub like Boulder, like Seattle, New York City, Austin is developing its own startup hub right now. You seek it out, And so Brad Feld from Boulder, when he used to come to LA, gave us a really good tip. We used to brand everything LA Tech. LA's huge, right? It takes hours to commute across LA. And he said, don't brand it LA Tech, brand it Santa Monica. Brand everything Santa Monica. But why? Why would we do that? Because people don't really know Santa Monica globally. He said, well, people didn't know Boulder at all. And Boulder is a college, walkable little town. And when he first arrived, there used to be Denver Tech. But after they branded it Boulder, people, when they arrived at Denver Airport, knew, oh, okay, now I got to go to Boulder, and once I get there, you're inevitably going to run into folks. And that's really the power behind that geographic idea. Right now, if you arrive in Stockholm, you have no idea where to go, and I wouldn't blame you because there is no center to it, and that's one of the unique challenges. But once there is a center, startups themselves gravitate towards it. Sydney itself doesn't really have yet a real center to it. If Brisbane does develop more of a dense center, you might find yourself attracting and becoming the real startup hub of Australia, in fact. Because startups love to be around other startups, and they love to have those serendipitous conversations at cafes and bumping into each other and all. It's incredibly, it's a perfect environment, right? Yeah. Yeah. Right. They do play a role in it. Yes and no. Boulder didn't have that. There wasn't a flagship company that drew anybody there. It was like the main investor, the foundry, that kind of drew everybody in there. So a single investor can kind of do that. I mean, what you're doing, River City Labs to a certain extent is, the nexus of, in my mind, of what could be the drawing factor here. So I encourage that, but I would encourage you to work. Right. But yeah, the conversation should also be with Microsoft. Microsoft has their office here. Do they have an office? They must have an office in Sydney as well. But if they focus more of their startup activity here, I would really engage Microsoft to consider that, and have them provide resources for the startup community here. And really, every company that has startups as part of their growth agenda, which are Google, Amazon Web Services, everyone markets towards startups. Really get them all together on one page to kind of participate, and you could leverage the fact that you have a real community here. To be fair, Fishburners really feels like the hub of the community in Sydney, and feels like they're passionate and about really building something there. But it doesn't seem like you're that far behind from my perspective. Certainly from the non-Aussie perspective looking in, it's like I can certainly see the amount of passion that I see here could easily surpass the head start that they do have. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's an event, because I was at River tomorrow, right? And what do you call that event? River Pitch, this is exactly the kind of thing that should be happening, by the way. I was part of produced an event, an executive producer of an event, which seems nearly identical, and I'm happy to see it happening here, because obviously I can't do it here. In the U.S., we have about 8 cities in the U.S. where we do Open Angel Forum, which is a dinner, essentially. And what it is we bring together the best investors in each city with 5 startups, put them in a room together, and have them pitch for 5 minutes each and see if we can get some fundraising to happen. And it's very qualified, selected startups and the investors. And it's invite only, but once they're in the room, it's very informal. Because that informal environment seems to be kind of what makes deals happen sometimes. And it seems very similar to what's happening here. I'm very excited. That is exactly what should happen here. That and the fact that I think Brisbane should be encouraged by the crowdfunding tsunami that is on the horizon. That seems like it's technically feasible. It's still questionable to a degree, but I'm on the side of optimism that this is going to be awesome for cities like Brisbane, that it's going to allow people, that it's going to relieve some bottlenecks financially for companies that aren't based in the Bay Area. I think this is going to be awesome for startups everywhere. They're going to be able to get funding through a more crowd-funded type structure. Angel List, by the way, and if you're a startup, you should be on Angel Listed. Write that down for sure. They just got approved by the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, literally last week to officially allow for crowdfunding. This is huge. We've been waiting for this for years. This is a dream come true, more so for you than for startups in the Bay Area. This is incredibly encouraging. So the timing is perfect. Timing is absolutely perfect. But what happens is when the other factor is something else that happened last week. We're not talking about things that happened in the last year. We're not talking about things that happened in the last month. We're talking about things that happened in the last 7 days. The SEC approved AngelList to do the funding. There was an acquisition by a company here that got acquired by Twitter. That also bodes incredibly well for Brisbane. And my point at breakfast this morning was, if Brisbane, having even just a single one, proves the market that innovation happens here, that somebody like Twitter would want to acquire. If it should happen that another Brisbane company gets acquired in the next less than a year, 6 months would be really nice. That would be a signal to investors worldwide that, wow, there are things coming out of Brisbane. And by the way, who are the venture capitalists there? There really isn't a substantial VC presence here. Who are the angel investors there, other than Steve? I mean, there's not a lot of competition on the investor side. And I don't mean to ruin the awesome party you've got going on here, Steve, but it's like let's get all the other investors in here, and if another acquisition happens here, and I'm not saying cheat and rig one, but crazier things have been done. This is the American in me speaking. So yeah.
Into Santa Monica?
Great question. So you're getting back to my point about how 2 of the top 5 moved down. Chris Sacca and David Lee from Silicon Angel. This is a fund up in the Bay Area who are the most active fund in the Bay Area. Ron Conway's, if you're familiar with Ron Conway. And TechCrunch has an awards ceremony called the Crunchies, and 2 of this most recent year, 2012's top 5 angel investors nominees, 2 of the 5 were the 2 that I'm referring to. That's why I say the 2 of the top 5. That's the 5 I'm referring to. And Why are people now looking at LA? Great. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. LA did some other things other than this hashtag thing that hopefully everyone has done by now, right? Raise your hand if you hadn't taken the photo. Can we embarrass you publicly yet? Yeah. You still have about 10 more minutes. So another thing we did was we decided, what do we do better than Silicon Valley? Because we figured that we need our own distinct calling card. And we sat around and scratched our heads. Said, you know what? Well, I just built a video team of video producers at Mahalo, 100 different producers, $500 a week is what we were paying them. If you were to try and do that in Silicon Valley, you'd have to pay a minimum of double, probably triple, because LA has thousands of aspiring video producers. We also happen to have the music industry, the record labels, and we have the script writers. We've got producers, editors. Essentially, what LA is about, we have Hollywood in our backyard and movies. We do content really well. Silicon Valley doesn't do content very well. They've never done content well. So we decided we do content, and if your startup is about content in any way, and a lot of them are, because as broadband gets faster, especially through mobile, it's becoming more video, it's becoming more audio, it's becoming more content. LA does content. So if your startup is about content, you should probably do it in LA and not in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley doesn't argue this point, right? This was our wedge, right? This was our differentiator. Matter of fact, when we, by the way, to be fair, Los Angeles doesn't do social networking all that well. Silicon Valley does. If you're doing social networking, you might want to be up there. And by the way, the investors that go along with both of these, same sort of thing. The investors in LA like content. And in fact, MySpace, if you remember MySpace, it was supposed to be a social network, ended up being about music content for the most part. Like even when we try to do social networking, it becomes about content. So that was one other sort of strategy. And when I arrived in Stockholm, because I now consult Stockholm I live in Stockholm full time, consulting them on building up the ecosystem there. When I first arrived, I met Per, who runs the largest incubator in Stockholm. Great guy. First thing he says to me is, "Oh, you're from Los Angeles. You know what Los Angeles does really well? Content." Those were literally the first words he said to me the first time I met him when I first arrived. And I said, "Per, you don't know how funny that is to me to hear you say this." He goes, "Why is that?" I said, "Because that was a conscious decision on a Thursday night at a Mexican restaurant. And here I am on the other side of the globe, and you're mission accomplished." That was exactly what we wanted to communicate globally, was to put that message out there, and it made it all the way to Sweden. So that was an awesome introduction to Sweden for me. But yeah, other questions? There's a bunch of hands up. So yeah. Yeah. Nice. Right, great question. So almost all of the incubators in Stockholm are university or government backed. Los Angeles had an explosion of, miraculously, 7 incubators all opened within 1 month. It was just a phenomenon. Like everyone had the same idea at the same time. They literally all launched simultaneously, which was quite humorous because now they're all out trying to recruit the same pool of startups. And the end result of that is, one had been there for a while, actually 2. But 5 more really popped up all of a sudden. 2 of them started doing really well. 2 of them are doing okay, and 2 of them maybe not as well, because they were competing for the same pool of startups. But looking at, universities should do the incubator thing. I'm really curious as to, having only been here for 24 hours now, I really want to, the university piece has been very underrepresented in the conversation thus far here. So I'm really curious to explore that piece and figure out maybe they should lead the charge on the incubator side of things, or the government here should lead the charge on the incubator side of things here. And if so, in either case, they should be inspired by Stockholm, because they do it really well, and they've done it really well for a while. The schools there, the technical school, they have 3 different schools who all have incubators, and they're good. They're really good. And then the non-academic government incubators in Stockholm are also really good. I'm happy to facilitate the conversations here to kind of inspire things to get them started, because I don't know. I mean, Steve's running an incubator essentially, which is also I was fortunate enough to meet with a lot of the folks there yesterday. Also impressively good there on average. You know, better than average when you travel around and you see the startup ideas. So, then I went to iLab as well, but iLab is government. Yes. And university. Okay, good. Okay, so there is a government. It totally escaped my mind. She knows how jet lagged I was yesterday when I was there, so I was half asleep, unfortunately, at that point. But yeah, so there is one here. Yes, sir. So your microphone's not on, so if you could talk a bit louder. Yeah. Cool. Yes. Great. Yeah, happy to. So you'll be happy to know that one of the key ingredients of the recipe of the startup community is the documentarian. In Los Angeles, it's called TechZulu. And you could argue Robert Scoble kind of plays this role in Silicon Valley to a degree. Somebody who really gets in and exposes for the world what's going on, right? And goes to each of the events. And I met somebody last night who seems to be playing the role here to a certain degree. And in Stockholm, last week, we got our documentarian. And this guy has been incredibly dedicated to going to all of the events. It's called Startup Spaces Sweden, or Startup Spaces Stockholm. And you can check out the site. He's following, or he was doing his own thing a bit, and then I'm since working with him on a very close basis. He's now playing the role very perfectly. It provides a window into the community for everybody outside, and it's an incredibly valuable resource for everybody inside. And when done correctly, sponsors will want to attach themselves to it. It's an incredibly important resource, and you might find it humorous to know the person who's doing this in Stockholm is an Australian. I don't know necessarily who the person is here who's doing it. The person I met last night, I don't know that he's doing it exactly right, because I haven't seen the site and how, the philosophy behind what he's doing. But the model for this is really TechZulu in LA. They were an incredible resource part of the process of LA becoming what it is now. And they've grown right along with it and benefited right along with it. It's been fantastic. It required on their part, because we don't have any government support in LA at all. They just struggled and did it on nights and weekends when all of these startup events usually happen. It was a labor of love for 2 years, and now it's finally become a business. But in Stockholm, knowing how important this role is to the community, I myself personally am really making an effort and getting my team to make an effort to support this resource, or provide all of our resources to this guy who's playing this role perfectly. So I would be inspired by both TechZulu and Startup Spaces in Stockholm. And if somebody is doing it here, everybody should support it as much as possible. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Hi. a broader awareness of what's happening. I mean, all those of us in the community knows there's heaps of cool stuff, bunch of smart people, some a small cadre of active investors. If you go back to the 90s in Silicon Valley, one of the things that was really spurred on that ecosystem. I mean, I remember back to things like Business 2 and Industry Standard and Red Herring being magazines that really, kind of jumped the shark. They jumped that divide into the chasm into mainstream business media. And that then attracted, obviously more money. Folks, clearly the pension funds and stuff saw there was great returns from a pure investment standpoint happening in that area. The challenge with media in a smaller ecosystem is the sustainability. I mean, and to a pretty important extent, the quality. I mean, I'm a cynic when it comes to media in Australia because we have the tech folks in the likes of Fairfax News Corporation who just regurgitate whatever Apple and Google say. They don't really do a lot of analysis and certainly don't look under the covers of what's actually going on. I mean, I actually asked the question, is anyone from any of the mainstream media publications here today? So even if you were to get, even if you were to get some, hyper enthusiastic young journalism grad to say, let's do, BrisbaneStartups.com or something, they've got to eat, and two, they've got to have, that sort of a level of support that takes them into that, quality of not just regurgitating press releases and posting up links to whoever's done something interesting on Twitter, which seems to be what a lot of media does in the startup space in Australia now. And how do you address that sort of getting that visibility beyond just, it's one thing we communicate by a mailing list and hanging out at River City Labs. What happens beyond here?
So there's a great follow-up to the last question, by the way. The documentarian role in LA, LA used to have no formal tech coverage at all. TechCrunch, and Pando Daily and the folks who do it in Silicon Valley don't share a lot of love with LA, nor do Forbes and we have our own. We have the Los Angeles Times, a rather decent favorite, and they tech-wise didn't do much and everything else. I should have brought I have it on my laptop. This whole presentation I do where I show. Once we had two documentarians, in fact, Tech Zulu and Ben Kuo from SoCal Tech, and they did it themselves, and they covered the community passionately, almost unpaid, for many months. And then once things started to blossom, fast forward to today, Forbes has a full-time person who covers nothing but LA. Pando Daily has a full-time person who does LA. Los Angeles Times has 3 people now who cover just tech for LA. 1 committed to startups. And they follow along with the community. And what I'm realizing as I say this, everything happens and is driven from the startup side of things. So there will be an unfair underrepresent. You're at the frustration stage right now in terms of investors and press coverage. You have enough startups going on here where it feels frustrating. Why aren't we getting? We're underrepresented in terms of press, and we're underrepresented in terms of investment. Yes, those are both true right now, and that's in a very frustrating phase to be in. It won't take much more incubation of your metaphorical baby here before people start paying attention. And this is why I said at the beginning, if everyone's taking photos and doing this tweeting and bringing the visibility of what's going on here, because one person doing it isn't enough. It's but if the whole community is doing it at every event they go to, press starts paying attention. I mean, it won't be long before TechCrunch is holy cow, is it just me, or have I seen a lot of tweets about Brisbane lately? So it makes a difference, and investors see all that too. So and you can ride this recent wave of this recent acquisition, and every time an acquisition happens, more good things will happen. But yes, right now it's underrepresented. It's frustrating. I can feel your frustration. But what happens is the press, the actual press that is here, will start realizing, oh, well, somebody's eating our lunch and covering tech locally. We need to start at least stop being embarrassed by the fact that there's the documentarian here initially is going to embarrass the entrenched media that are here, and then that's going to kind of force them into covering it on a more regular basis. They should do it preemptively. They should do it right now, and your local media and press should start doing the favor to the community and start covering it more. I hope that they do. And it is a shame that they're not here, but they're not going to be here until they're embarrassed into the party, basically. I mean, that's what happened in LA anyway. Yeah. 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 Yep. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah. We got to get the nest part figured out. Like, where's the let's start a conversation about where this community is going to be based in the city, right? Let's create incentives to get everyone there for the most part, and definitely include Steve in this conversation because he's, yeah, definitely, because he's done the most so far on this for the most part. But there's a couple of other players that are part of that equation. Like the library, to a certain degree, seems to have ambitions to want to participate in this, and I assume there might be others. And what else? If somebody does step up to play the documentarian role, just pay them. So absolutely worth it. Like, just be like, hey, well, you're doing a great job. Like, you know, pay them halftime or whatever. Like, that's what we're talking about in Stockholm with this guy. But the reality is, some private entity like Amazon Web Services will end up sponsoring them. Gosh, what else? Support the angel events that do go on here in whatever capacity possible. Definitely, it seems like the library is providing the resource for people who do want to do an event. By the way, I would really be curious to hear if you do produce a tech event here in the city, regardless of how small it is, like if it's the Django or Python developer meetup. People had their hands up earlier. I would love to hear the events that are going on already. We need to support them as much as possible by giving them a resource where they can host events. Because there's a lot of people who do have the ambition. Maybe they want to host a, NoSQL database engineers meetup, and right now they're doing it at some cafe, which is not optimal. They would love to do it somewhere with a podium and a stage and a projector and lighting and Wi-Fi. A calendar, if somebody can make a calendar happen, usually the documentarian does this, a job board for everybody, a regular monthly event, like it's something like this that would happen regularly, consistently every month, where you can invite people in like myself to participate at that event. It seems like the beginning of that, these things are all in place to certain degrees. But all of these things, and then it's a strategy around building something that attracts outside looky-loos, so to speak. Because once you have the monthly event that happens every month, and then you have the smaller weekly events that happen every week, and all the weekly events feed into the big monthly event, and everyone's doing their part in tweeting, at every event that they go to. People from outside, when they visit the region, the Apple Store effect will happen. They'll realize, like, if they come anywhere near Australia, near Zealand, or in Sydney, whatever, they'll come and they'll want to see this. They'll want to come to see this monthly event with 600 geeks in one room. Because if you're ever in New York, near New York Tech Meetup, go to New York Tech Meetup and prepare to have your mind blown. Like, that is an amazing event. And we're building that in Stockholm now. Like, our first event was 150 people. The next one is already set to be about 300 people. LA, the first monthly event started out at 14 people, and it's now regularly over 700 people. The monthly event thing is a big piece to it. yeah, I can get you a full list. But yeah. Yeah. Watch This Week in Startups. It's a very inspiring show that I co-host until I moved to Stockholm with Jason, and it's a unique resource for entrepreneurs everywhere to get inspired, and it's almost the global, a weekly meetup for everyone to kind of get inspiration. And you know what I'm realizing now is we should have Brisbane compete with another city, because we do these city versus city competitions on the show, where we have Stockholm versus South Africa, and London versus Berlin, and we should have Brisbane compete with somebody, and we should make sure Brisbane wins. If you know anyone on the show who could help him, sway the voting on the show. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Hello, hi. I'm a born and bred Brisbane startup company. We're called More Shop, by the way, and we're finding incredibly hard for us to actually get our ideas out to exposure. We talk about pitch, practice your pitch, but who do you pitch to? That was a big problem. So earlier in your conversation, you said, stop waiting for the government to try and do something about it. And in your experience, what do startups do? Do the startups get together in Santa Monica and say, look, mate, let's get 5 of this company together, let's create a list. It's easy to maintain a list, and we create the attention that we need to.
Right. Has anyone, it sounds crazy, but yes.
Yeah, and that's the initiative. Is that what being done in startup companies?
Yeah, exactly. So you just gave me an idea is, has anyone built the startup map of Brisbane? There is? Brisbane specifically should have a map of where the startups are, and they probably need to do this as part of the process of figuring out where the real hub of it all should be. And put everybody on there, and they can color code it by how much funding they have or how many, and create it almost like a database of, if you know Crunchbase, TechCrunch has this part of TechCrunch called Crunchbase, where every startup you can see their funding history, the executives at the company, a profile about what they do in a photo. Somebody should build the database of the startups here. And then part of that is their location, which all gets shown on a map. And that alone would be very helpful to investors who are interested in the area to be able to focus in on what they want to do. Yeah, and if this is something the government could have, be like, oh, this is not our expertise on how to build something like that. For you, it's trivial, right, to build something like that, the platform for it, and then getting the message out to everybody. This should be done. Stockholm recently did it. And it's just one of these extra little miniature ingredients that's helpful, not crucial, but certainly helpful in getting the ball rolling. Yeah. But yes, it is as simple as you getting frustrated and getting 10 friends together and making something like that happen. Yeah. But you have a government who's willing to support things like this in some way. So we didn't even have that. So I mean, don't look at your government as like, oh, we're waiting for this. It's like we had nothing.
Hi there, Tyler. I was an entrepreneur back in the 90s, London and Munich, and first Tuesday was a massive event.
Yeah.
Once a month, we had a key speaker. Yeah. Everybody came together. Everybody got drunk together.
Yeah.
Everybody exchanged stuff.
Yeah.
Tried doing this in Brisbane on the Sunshine Coast. It's always reliant in Australia, I find, on government sponsorship, whereas there was no government involvement whatsoever in you.
Right.
And really, how do you get the large companies involved and many partners of finance ones into this startup space? That's what it is.
Or which bank is catering the startups here, if any? Huh? Yeah. None, right? Well, huh? What's that? But to answer your question is, what will happen is, once the visibility starts, the recognition starts happening that there is a community here, here's how it starts to play out, and hopefully will relieve some of the frustration, but a bank will step up and say, whoa, wow, there's a startup community here. We want to be the official bank that caters to startups. Because all the funding that you get, we want to keep it in our bank accounts in the Valley, it's Silicon Valley Bank, right? Silicon Valley Bank has been so successful at this, they're going global because they realize that other banks in other cities are sleeping at the wheel on this opportunity. So they're now very entrenched in London, now going into Asia. I'm talking with them about coming to Stockholm because the Stockholm banks are also a little bit asleep at the wheel at the opportunity on this. And if the banks here continue to sleep at the wheel, you might see Silicon Valley Bank here before long. So nudge, nudge to the banks here. Like you might, you've got about 6 to 9 months to get your act together. And if they do, what they really should do is sponsor the monthly event, right? So whoever wants to be the accountant or the accounting firm that is committed to startups, and one of them will step up and eventually do this because this is part of their growth strategy, or a recruiting firm potentially, or all the service providers that play into the ecosystem need to step up and do their sponsorship role in all of this. So it's there, but it's, like I said, we're right at that frustration point where it's the startup stuff is starting to happen here, it's going to happen here, but the other parties that are on the waiting lines, like the investors, the banks, are watching subtly or not quite. And this whole tweeting strategy I was talking about, this map strategy we were talking about, all of these strategies play into, hey, look, we're here, we're a community, you need, and then it all starts falling into place. And that's that tipping point. Tipping point is when the banks say, oh, there is a community big enough here that matches our interest to start sponsoring it, right? That's that magic tipping point. You're right there. You're right there. And that's why you're so frustrated, is because it's so close. And hopefully that paints the picture of how I see where it is right now. So yeah, that's why I get excited personally, because to me it's inevitable. But that, again, this is why you see, like, why is this guy so crazy about us tweeting photos? Like, because this is what it really drove it for us in LA. And this is why you're so close to this tipping point that it's like, guys, you're almost there. Like, let's just yell a little bit louder so the neighbors hear that we're having an awesome party in here, and then it really gets fun. So, yeah. But there's tons of hands. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. It seems, from what you've been saying, a lot of the very successful startup communities overseas are based in unique regions outside of the traditional financial district or business district of the city, and which would give them the opportunity to create their own branding as a startup community,
That's
but
right.
also give the individual startups the capacity and space to grow.
That's right.
Because as an entrepreneur, whilst it's absolutely a great option to be part of a community, you also need to consider the economics of
That's right.
Renting, which in Brisbane can be quite expensive as a startup.
Sure.
What do you suggest in terms of identifying a nest and how we could go about, as a community, finding a location which sort of meets all of those requirements and enables us to come together but also to grow, and where the importance of physical location versus virtual for startups as part of that physical community comes in?
It generally, it may likely end up being in a place that's less expensive on a square foot basis for everyone to get involved. I don't know the details of the market, the real estate market here, so I'm just spitting out generalities. But I would, if the conversation is going to be had around, where should we really focus this, and where is it at currently, and how willing is Steve to move River City Labs where wherever he wants to go, that plays a big factor. So, yeah, it should be somewhere reasonable, that's convenient for everybody to get to, that is on a square foot basis real reasonable. You don't need that much space. I mean, so if you've been to Soma in San Francisco, it's call it 5 blocks by 4 blocks, you know, and that's the biggest community in the world right there. I mean, you might be able to get 2 by 2 blocks might suffice, you know, Brisbane. So we're not talking about a big area. I mean, somebody mentioned it at the breakfast. There's some area near the library, this big abandoned. When I hear abandoned, I instantly get excited. I'm like, yep, that's probably where it's going to be. You know, yeah, it could be one massive kind of facility that's with an old warehouse somewhere. That's a good point. I don't really. The virtual side of it isn't something I've given much thought to. I can say that in London, you know, Old Street where everything happened, that happened organically, and it was in the cheap part of town. And the government liked that. It's like, oh, yeah, it was about time we kind of dusted off Old Street anyways, you know. And it all started when somebody opened their co-working space there, and it really grew quite well. And the documentarian in London, Mike Butcher, who's the TechCrunch editor, you know, lended his support, and it really grew organically. And then that has become the real community there. It really grew to cover the whole Shoreditch area. And the government provided tax incentives for people in the area, and it just they branded it Tech City, and they got Google to open their office there, and just, you know, they made it a party. I really get inspired by the work other cities have done. You know, we're not working in a vacuum here. There's very recent roadmaps in the form of LA, in the form of London. Tel Aviv has their own interesting story, and a book has recently been published on Tel Aviv specifically. And Boulder, and the book on Boulder that Brad Feld did. It's like the people who are really sincere about really making things happen here need to look at what's been done in the other cities, figure out what makes sense to do here, involve the people who are really passionate about being involved here, and providing the resources, and let's make the party happen. It's going to happen. It's just a question of how and when, and it's incredibly exciting. I hope my enthusiasm is sensed, because I look at this room and I feel like I'm in a time machine to 2009 Los Angeles, and that was a very fond moment, and that moment where it all just started happening. So I already have been tweeting out that it's really fun to be back in this phase of it, because it's a little powder keg about to take off. So, like I said, a year from now, you'll look back and be like, remember when we were all complaining about how we couldn't, you know, read all this stuff? So that's my interpretation of where things are at here. So, yeah.
One of my important jobs is to keep us on time this morning, so we might draw close to questions. Please thank Tyler for some great insights.